champion of the undersea, hero of the deep. Gillion Tidestrider, champion of the undersea, hero of the deep. Defenestrator of Gillion Tidestrider, the one, champion of the undersea, hero of the deep, singer, songwriter.
Well, I'm Gillion Tidestrider,
So,
champion of the undersea, hero of the deep,
does that-
weed
does that-
eater. Just earlier, about 5
My
seconds
name is
ago.
Gillion Tidestrider, champion of the undersea, hero of the deep, serpent rider,
All right.
brother of Dugon.
All right.
Paramount
who
champion,
gone?
Lawful
Gone where?
liberator. That's one I just thought of. Gillian Tidestrider, champion of the undersea, hero of the deep, Paramount champion, singer, songwriter on.
Can't even remember all his titles. Too many.
Pretzel carrier, Leviathan tamer, moisture master.
This video is going to contain major spoilers for Just Roll With It Riptide campaign, episode 52. This is your only warning. Got it? Okay. That said, let's talk about that spoiler, am I right? Ferin is alive. Battered he may be, it's him, and it's been a twist of emotions. He recognizes Jay and Chip and feels some joy, and considering that the Riptide crew as a whole have a connection of some kind to the Black Rose Pirates, this is a huge moment. When it comes down to Chip egging Gillian towards Dre, excitedly proclaiming that he's a Tidestrider, Dre doesn't give him much of a reaction.
Also Gillian.
That's Gillian.
Yeah, you remember Finn? How could I forget? Huh? What? Look at him.
Gillian.
Look at him.
Tidestrider.
They don't look nothing alike.
There's fish.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't see it. These are like what? Disconnected, twice removed, cousin.
Just tell him.
We're talking about Finn Tidestrider?
Finn Tidestrider.
Did you know him?
He was on the ship.
One of my best friends.
Finn Tidestrider was my grandfather.
Nah.
No, yes, definitely.
He is.
Definitely was.
Huh.
Not that I ever knew him that well, but where is he?
I cannot tell you how many times I've rewatched this clip. 52 episodes in, I think we can all assume we know Gillian's patterns very well. Excitable, lawful, good paladin with the quite literal fish out of water trope, interpreting the world in black and white views of good and evil, and exacting justice as he sees fit and helping those in need as best he can. Obviously, he's troubled and burdened by many things. From a young age, something or someone forced him to bear the weight of the world on his shoulders. Some manner of imposed destiny instilled into him, the idea that he's the chosen one of some sort into his head. Gillion Tidestrider, champion of the undersea, hero of the deep, the one, you know, him and his long string of titles that he bears proudly anytime he meets anyone new and adds new titles nearly every adventure. You know, this introduction that he can barely resist saying in full to anyone. Our Gillian does not show this same enthusiasm towards Dre. Now, I think it is worth mentioning that he was going to, until Dre shut him down in favor of hearing Jay introduce herself. Perhaps Gillian's lack of an introduction was spurred from him being shut down initially, but I do feel strongly that it's more than just that. Why did Gillian only say his first name? Why did he hesitate so much in this encounter? Why did he not step forward and excitedly proclaim that yes, Finn Tidestrider is his grandfather. Yes, he is a Tidestrider. He was open about the idea of it to Jay and Chip when he got a hold of Finn's book in Alvaros's library, so why the hesitation here? Is it because, maybe, that Dre can actually vouch for who Finn is and confirm or deny anything here? Not to mention, by the time Gillian finally does say outright that Finn is his grandfather, Dre fully shuts this down. He doesn't see a resemblance to Finn, doesn't give Gillian any reaction, and Gillian doesn't give him much to work with, only offering that he didn't know him very well. Dre and Finn were best friends. Dre would surely know if Finn had any kids or grandkids, and what they realistically look like in theory. Now, there's something here that I need to go over, and that's some Tidestrider lore, and some Reddit stuff related to it. When I finally watched Hole in the Sea, after watching 48 entire episodes of Riptide and then finding out that apparently there was a one-shot prequel this entire time and I was just too new to the fandom to have known about that, oh my... I picked up on a few inconsistencies on the Tidestriders instantly that had me scratching my head so much that I had to put it down on the Reddit. They are as follows. In Hole in the Sea, Finn suggests that he might settle down and have kids as part of his retirement from the Black Rose Pirates. This sets down the strong implication that he, in this time, does not have kids. Mind you, during Hole in the Sea, Gillian would be 12 years old. In Finn's flashback in the Undersea, Gillian is present. However, no significant note was made about him being his grandson, only that he was a student and that Finn could barely even recall his name. Initially, I received a response from Condi stating that it was very worth noting that they didn't have their characters or the general plot of the campaign figured out when they did the prequel one-shots, so any inconsistencies are essentially just that. They weren't even sure if they were even going to be doing Riptide at that point, so anything canonized in the episodes of Riptide should be taken as canon over anything conflicting in the Black Rose Pirates. This was all great and made sense. When I eventually did more backlog watching, I did end up discovering that yeah, there was actually a chance Riptide wasn't going to happen. They were gauging interest with the Prime Force, Black Rose, and Mythborn to see what made it to the main channel and what made it to Patreon. I didn't start listening to the podcast until roughly May or June, so yeah, missed that part. Inconsistencies made sense, so I left that stuff alone. However, it wasn't until I made a different post touching on an offhanded comment Gillian made, which is something that's actually going to support my theory here. In episode 50, when Ollie and Earl drop off the Riptide pirates at the block, there's this exchange.
Maybe we'll hit one of the sea marts and like get some supplies and stuff.
Oh, cool. Like when my parents dropped me off for training. You'll come back though, right?
Yeah, of course. Just don't die.
Now, this made me snap my head up and rewind multiple times. Some folks brushed past it, but others, myself included, honed in on this passing comment. Sure, it could be passed off as something more innocent and surface level, but Gillian's already said so many things in the past that this is just yet another eyebrow raiser. Gillian's parents had abandoned him to train? Was he disowned by his parents in some way? Did they leave him to train for some kind of destiny and just never check back in on him? Why did he say that? Why was that the question he immediately followed up with? So I made a post about it, of course. I'll have links to these threads in the description, by the way, since there were some excellent comments on this post specifically that I'd recommend reading through. Specifically, we're going to look at this one by Severed7 because I accidentally aggroed Grizzly. User Severed7 comments. Might be related. I've always thought it was weird that Finn seemingly had no idea about having Gil as a grandson in his flashback for the Black Rose Pirates one-shot. I replied, I thought about it too, and had a post mention it, but I wouldn't put too much thought into it. Condi confirmed that any inconsistencies in the prequel are just that. The canon in Riptide takes over whatever was said in the prequel. Here's where he mentioned it, and there's a link to that thread being mentioned, the Tidestrider one. But at the same time, if we were to take that into consideration, that's a bit heavy. A lot of implications to think about if they keep that as the case. And that's where Grizzly suddenly steps into this thread. Yo, just letting everyone who sees this know that I added a reply to the linked post with information to hopefully clarify the presented inconsistency. I try to keep things consistent and will gladly clarify the correct information if ever conflicting. Now, seeing this notification on my phone naturally made me lose my mind briefly, as if the excitement of having Condi reply to that post 16 days prior wasn't riveting enough. Back to the Tidestrider inconsistency post, here's the message that Grizzly left for us. Adding again, most of what happened in the one-shot prequel is still consistent with the present day of Riptide. Even without being certain of the overarching narrative, I definitely wanted to make sure of that. Continuity is very important to me. He was very adamant about that, seemingly hand-waving away what Condi had commented here previously. At the time, I didn't really think much more on this, as really the only thing that needed genuine clarifying on his end was in regards to a mistake made about the timeline, where Finn's flashback accidentally implied Gillian would be in his 40s come Riptide, when in actuality Gillian is anywhere from 8 to 9 in the flashback, and that Finn would have been on the Midnight Rose for 2 to 3 years. So I kind of left it alone. Maybe it wasn't in either of their places a remark about Slimecicle's characters on these fronts. Maybe whatever was being discussed about the other inconsistencies I mentioned here were important elsewhere, or just not meant to be looked into that hard or something. I don't know. I just kind of walked away a little confused, but left it alone. But now... but now, man... Now you're sitting here telling me that not only is it implied that Gillian's parents seemingly abandoned him to start training, presumably for whatever destiny was planted on his shoulders, starting anywhere from as young as 8 years old, and eventually straight up banished from the Undersea, but now you're telling me that Dre doesn't even believe that Gillian is directly related to Finn? This made me start thinking about the art of Finn and Gillian as well. Initially, I thought, well, the art of Finn is a little old. Maybe at the time they hadn't really established that tritons had fin-like ears, and that was a later development used for Gillian upon his design. I thought it strange that Finn had more elf-like ears, but chalked it up to just that. But now, with Dre's comment and Grizzly insisting that he was sure to keep things as consistent as possible, I think it has a deeper meaning. Finn and Gillian don't look anything alike. Finn is a much deeper blue, bears no markings, and has elf-like ears, whereas Gillian is a paler blue-green, coral growing out of his head, markings, and Finn-like ears. Finn never mentioned having kids, he barely remembered Gillian's name, Dre doesn't see a resemblance, we have no idea who Gillian's parents are. Are you catching what I'm putting down? Gillian is lying about who he is, or at the very least, not being wholly honest. Something fishy is going on here, and we simply don't have enough information about him to put together the full picture. Gillian is not the type to lie. He hates liars and is a terrible liar himself, sometimes unable to even sit and physically force himself to lie. Hell, this is literally the entire reason why Gillian starts beating Chip's entire ass in episode 15. It's a great dishonor to deceive and fib, so how can Gil pull this off and why? Easy. Is it technically lying if all you're doing is omitting the truth? Is it technically lying if you're just leaving out some details? He hid the part about being banished from the Undersea this entire time. What else is he hiding? Who are you exactly? What is your destiny truly? What did you do in the Undersea? Or rather, what did the Undersea do to you? Though it's clearly been proven that Gillian hiding things from his past and background is not outside of his character, there's an alternative explanation for this theory that he isn't actually a Tidestrider, and that's that maybe he was lied to. Because at the end of the day, even though he was very hesitant to say anything to Dre during that encounter, he still looked him in the eyes and said Finn Tidestrider was my grandfather. If Gillian was aware that he wasn't related to Finn at all, then him saying this to Dre would be a direct outright lie, which again, Gillian does not like to lie. We don't know anything about his parents except that they dropped him off for training and seemingly did not return. We know his destiny was prioritized above all else, probably to an unhealthy degree given how his flashback with his sister Eden played out in episode 8, and that training was probably a negative experience for him given how he gets nervous with the idea of training when Caspian teaches him a spell in episode 32, or the what if episode that shows an exhausted, jaded teacher struggling to help him learn an ice spell. Maybe the kid needed something going on in his life that was happy. Maybe he really looked up to Finn as a teacher, admiring and respecting him greatly, that someone planted in his head, either intentionally or as a metaphor, that Finn is his grandfather. And he just never let go of that because he needed to hold on to something. Considering that he was likely abandoned after being dropped off, and Finn was one of his teachers, maybe it could have been a lie Gillian told himself as a kid to feel a little better, then lost himself in it and forgot that it was never true to begin with. Gillian is hiding a lot from us, and the longer Riptide progresses, the more interesting glimpses we get into his character. It's only a matter of time until his full story is displayed out before us and the crew, and with his big secret out in the air, Chip and Jay are eventually going to have questions for him. That is, of course, after they get out of the block, hash out Jay's own problems that are currently at the forefront and a literal active threat at the moment, and make sure all of them are okay. At the time of writing this, episode 53 isn't out just yet, so I'd like to ask someone to hold my hand before we get into that, yeah? Gillian isn't a Tidestrider. He never was. He's been lying to everyone, intentionally or not. Finn is not his grandfather. Or at least, that's just my theory. Let me know what you guys think of this. I've been enjoying having really big discussions about Riptide lately and hearing everyone else's thoughts and interpretations about the show, so I'd like to kind of hear what everyone thinks. You think maybe I'm looking into this too much? Did I misinterpret what Grizzly said in that Reddit post? Come on, talk to me. Please, talk to me. I love this show so much, you guys. Talk to me. Come on.